My name is Diane Lee, and I am president of the San Francisco Young Democrats. Welcome to the first Assembly District 17 debate of 2014. First of all, I'd like to thank our candidates, Supervisors David Chiu and Supervisor David Campos. Moderator from the San Francisco Chronicle, Maria Lagos.
Just got married a couple of weeks ago.
Let's go.
Good evening. My name is David Campos. For me, the journey that brought me to this stage started 29 years ago, when my parents told me, my two little sisters, that we were leaving our native country, undocumented, coming to the US in search of the American dream. You see, for me, the experience of crossing that border and literally risking our lives, and once we got to the other side, of seeing my parents struggle, my mom as a janitor, my dad working 2 jobs, that experience has come to define who I am. It is because of that experience that I actually left private practice and decided to run for a seat on the Board of Supervisors. Because you see, I believe that people like my parents, who know what it's like to struggle, who know what it's like to be the underdog, they deserve a voice in government. And it is because of that experience that as we see so much wealth and prosperity in San Francisco, that I have to speak out and talk about the disparity, the tale of 2 cities that is leaving so many of us out of that prosperity. And I believe that as this campaign progresses, that just like there's a tale of 2 San Franciscos, in this race, there's a tale of 2 Davids. In fact, I think there's a tale of 2 David Chius. But the difference between the Davids are stark. They are as stark as the difference between the Chamber of Commerce and the tamale lady in the Mission. They are as stark as the luxury condo developer and the tenant who is fearful of eviction. I believe that the person who represents the 17th Assembly District, who follows on the footsteps of Tom Ammiano, has to be more than just a good vote some of the time, or even most of the time. In Spanish, there is a saying, "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres." Tell me who you walk with and I'll tell you who I am, who you are. Tonight you're going to hear who I walk with, and I walk with them and they walk with me, because at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, I'm going to be with them, not the Chamber of Commerce.
I don't know if my wife is here yet. She texted me that she's late on Muni, which we will talk about tonight. I'm David Chiu, and thank you all for being part of our participatory democracy. I'm the first kid in my family born here in the United States. Like David, my parents immigrated here because they were looking for more opportunity for my brothers and I. We grew up 3,000 miles away in Boston. 18 years ago, I moved to San Francisco for the very first time. And I was so excited that I was happy to sleep on the floor of a friend of mine who lived in the Tenderloin. Because I had a sense, I think we all have a sense, that this is a very special city. It's special because of our values, it's special because of our diversity, it's special because of our innovation. We know that there's an amazing sense of possibility within our 7x7 miles. Every experience I've had over the last 18 years has confirmed that. I've worked with some of you as a civil rights advocate. Others of you helped to start a small business with me. At night, I volunteered with some of you in this room with neighborhood associations to make our little special corners of the city special. In 2008, I ran for public office because at that time, City Hall was not as functional as it needed to be. And I'm proud of the fact that 6 years later, as the president of your Board of Supervisors, I think the tone at City Hall has changed. We have brought people together to get things done, to deliver. And I'm proud to talk about our record of helping to make sure we're protecting our families and the environment, making sure we're creating jobs and housing. Now, I am running for the Assembly because it is absolutely critical that we protect what is special about our city. And we are in the midst of an affordability crisis that is threatening what is special. I think we need a representative who will go to Sacramento to make sure that San Francisco gets our fair share, our resources to build affordable housing, to build transit, to protect our families, and to make sure that all of you, as the next generation of leaders in this town, thrive.
Thanks, Dave. First question, which is about affordability. And we're going to start with Supervisor Chiu. If I say David, it's going to get really confusing. But you know when I say thanks, David, that means...
You can say David C. too.
We're going to come up with some nicknames during this campaign. So, the majority of young people in San Francisco are renters. And we'd like to hear specifically what you've done to protect renters and what you would like to do at the state level. And also specifically, do you think there's actually a political will to reform the Ellis Act up there?
So first of all, I should mention that I am a tenant, and even on the salary of a member of the Board of Supervisors, I cannot afford an average mortgage in many neighborhoods in my district. Everyone who lives here needs to have an opportunity to live here, and that is being threatened right now. I'm proud of my record of delivering for tenants and for affordable housing. I've passed about 10 pieces of legislation to build more affordable housing for seniors, for homeless veterans, for homeless youth. This year alone, during this affordability crisis, I was proud to help craft a 10-year moratorium on the conversion of condos. I was proud to make sure that we have over 1,000 tenants who are receiving pro bono help and representation in evictions. I was proud to make sure that tenants who are seeing their rents increase can apply for a hardship waiver. But I think there's so much more we can do. Both David Campos and I, we are committed to reforming the Ellis Act. We need to make sure that we are overturning those speculators who are taking advantage of us. We need to find more sources of financing for our affordable housing. And right now, at our state capitol, there are not enough people fighting for affordable housing. In fact, Governor Brown recently vetoed a bill that would have helped many folks around the state. We need to get this done. And we need an assembly person who can be effective at getting this done. And I've been happy that many of us are talking the talk, but I've been able to deliver and carry the line and get legislation done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. And I want to talk at some point about the various proposals that I have introduced to deal with the Ellis Act in this crisis. I'm glad to see, David, that you finally acknowledge that there is a crisis, because the first time the Chronicle covered this story, you did not recognize that we indeed have this disparity. But let me first talk about what I'm not going to do. One thing that I'm not going to do on the Board of Supervisors or in Sacramento is to actually jeopardize the limited number of rent control units that we have. You say you're a tenant. I'm surprised that as a tenant you would actually vote to demolish more than 1,500 units of rent control housing in Park Merced. I also think that we need to stand up to luxury condo developers, even if it means losing some, monetary contributions to the campaign. That's why I'm proposing legislation to regulate buyouts, and legislation that actually requires that the amount of relocation costs that are paid when an eviction happens actually allow the tenant to stay in San Francisco. Now, let me say this, that it is easy to talk about what you're going to do, but I think that you have to rely on the record that you have. And I am proud that I have consistently been with tenants. And the thing about David Campos is that with this David, there doesn't have to be a lobbying effort at City Hall on the part of tenants to actually get me to do the right thing. You know from the very beginning where David Campos is. And I was the first to talk about the Ellis Act way before it became popular. And I'm glad that now other politicians are doing it. But you know what? Get in line, because it's been a long time since this has been a crisis, and we need to do something now.
So I very much appreciate my colleague and the talk that he's been talking about these issues, but the fact of the matter is, in our years serving together, he's actually not been able to pass very much legislation at all. In fact, this past year, I've moved forward 4 significant policies to help tenants in affordable housing. He's only been able to move forward 1. And I want to talk for a moment about Park Merced, because we have an identical record when it comes to our tenants, except for that issue. And I happen to think that when you had 1,500 units that were deteriorating and falling apart, we need to replace that with close to 90,000 new units where every tenant in that space will have rent control protections for the rest of their lives and a $200 million fund to make sure that they're protected.
Thank you. We're going to keep talking about affordable housing because it's on a lot of people's minds. As you know, the city passed a ballot measure recently to set up an affordable housing trust fund. And
At Carbondale Plaza, we need the rainbow flag. Return to the public.
thank you. We're gonna move on.
Tell us it's never looked better.
I won't have that extra time. So, Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Most of the money in that trust fund is going to be going towards repairing existing public housing. How do you think the city can incentivize actually constructing new housing for low and middle income folks?
Well, I think that there are definitely incentives that we have to create, but I think that part of the problem is that we had the wrong priorities. We did not get into this crisis overnight. We got into this crisis because folk in City Hall chose to approve projects that create the one thing we don't need, which is more luxury housing. You're not going to address this crisis unless you actually draw a line in the sand and tend to tell developers, you want to build in San Francisco? Well, you have to build for people who can actually afford to buy the homes you're building. And for the workers, you know, there are workers working on these projects who can never afford to live in any of those units. The other thing that I would say is that, you know, David Chiu talks about effectiveness. I have a different definition of effectiveness, and it's especially critical in this issue of affordability. It's not about the number of ordinances that you pass, but it's actually about the social change that you effectuate. If the number of laws passed define effectiveness, Washington, D.C. and Sacramento would be in much better shape today than they are. That is not the point. It is about how you actually change the lives of people. Tom Ammiano is actually the most effective legislator this past year. You know, David Chiu had a push-pull where he talked, I guess, the negative thing of being an activist. Well, Tom Ammiano, David wanted me to tell you that activist Tom Ammiano passed 13 pieces of legislation to protect working people in Sacramento, and he did that without having to compromise his principles.
Okay, thank you. Incentivize housing for low and middle income folks.
Well, I think one of the things that is important is that we need leaders who can bring people together to hammer out difficult consensus. And for example, a few years ago, we had a difficult debate about how we were going to move forward the Hunters Point Bayview area. And David Campos cast votes that would have killed a project that is rebuilding the Alice Griffith Public Housing Project, that is building 10,000 units of new housing, the most affordability that our city has seen in years. In fact, David has voted to ensure that literally tens of thousands of housing units are not being built today. And if all of this had been built today, the crisis that we are in would have been lessened.
You got 30 seconds to respond.
It sounds like the developer line, yeah, it is true that I have voted about a number of projects because they wanted to create more luxury housing. I don't think that the creation of luxury housing would have made things better. It actually would have exacerbated the problem. I believe in development. There are many things that have happened in my district. But the thing is, the difference is that it's the right kind of development. This idea that somehow you can just build your way out of a crisis. You know, supply-side economics did not work under Ronald Reagan. In supply-side economics, that somehow luxury housing will trickle down and somehow working people can afford it, doesn't work that way.
If you win, who would you like to see the mayor appoint to replace you on the board?
Maybe David and I can agree on this one. I think that if any one of us wins, when any one of us wins, and I think we're going to win, I think that the people of District 9, the people of District 3 should be the ones to decide who actually gets appointed. I actually think that we should change the law so that it is the voters and not the mayor of San Francisco that makes that community-rooted individuals in District 9, and I want to have a conversation with a number of them, but it's going to be a conversation that is transparent, that includes the entire community. District 9 is not only, arguably the most progressive district in the city, but it's a very special place. Someone who understands that we have to protect its diversity, protect not only its ethnic diversity, but its socioeconomic diversity. I would like to see more women in elected office, so I'd like to see more women in elected office.
So I agree with David on this. I do think that it would be preferable for the people of District 3 or District 9 to choose our successors, and I would support a change in our city charter in order to do that. And I also think we need to make sure that our next district representatives are not only responsive to our neighborhoods, not only responsive to the challenges that our city is facing, but are able to hammer out the consensus and stand up for what we care about. So, for example, in my district, I was proud to lead the fight against the 8 Washington luxury condos, because this is not where our city should be going. And I would look for a replacement that hopefully shared those values and stood up for where we're going as a city.
Well, in terms of 8 Washington, David and I did agree on that. I think the difference there is that, I didn't oppose 8 Washington just because it's in my district and I was getting political pressure from people that I knew were going to vote for me or against me. I voted against 8 Washington because I think it goes against what we need in San Francisco. The idea that you can build $5 million condos and somehow that's something that's in the interest of the public is something that never made sense to me.
Another hypothetical for you. If you're elected, what state assembly committees would you like to serve on and why?
So I think that San Francisco needs more resources in a whole slew of areas. First and foremost, we need more money to help us build affordable housing. When our state redevelopment agency was slashed and eliminated, we lost a significant portion of money to move that forward. We're also, as a city and as a state, going over a transit funding cliff, and this is part of the reason why I'm still not sure if my wife is here. We need to make sure that we are making our roads safe for pedestrians and for cyclists. We need to make sure that Muni is not late 40% of the time. We need to make sure that we have a city that you can get around with efficiently. We also need more resources for young people. We have to make sure that City College remains solvent and an institution for the rest of the century. And we have to make sure that all of our young people who are trying to figure out that sense of possibility in the city have an opportunity to succeed. We need more money for higher education. We need more money for a K-12 system. And I want to go to Sacramento to serve on those committees to bring those resources back to our city.
I think the overarching issue that I'm going to focus on when I'm in Sacramento is the issue of affordability. Because what's happening to San Francisco, it's also happening in the rest of the state of California. And within affordability, I think that we have to focus on issues like housing, and I think that there are committees where we can actually bring in more money to San Francisco. I actually have been able to get the endorsements of key leaders in Sacramento so that we have that kind of relationship that will ensure that San Francisco gets the money it needs. I'm proud that the woman, the first lesbian ever who's going to be the next Speaker of the State Assembly, Toni Atkins, has endorsed my candidacy. I also want to focus on education because I think education is the great civil rights issue of the day. I am here, this undocumented kid from Guatemala, because of our public school system. And I want every child in my district and every child in California to have the same opportunities that I have. That's what I think is needed. And I am proud that I am the candidate who has received the sole endorsement of our teachers in San Francisco, because I think that tells you why, this is more than just something I talk about. It's something that I live on a daily basis.
So I am also proud to have relationships with leaders in Sacramento who I look forward to working with to get more resources for our city. Starting with our Attorney General Kamala Harris, starting with our Controller John Chung, starting with 8 members of the Assembly who know that I have been effective. Now, what I will though say is David has been talking about so-called corporate interests, and I think it's funny that he keeps referring to the support I'm getting, because in Sacramento, some of our state's largest corporate interests are helping him to raise money, and in David's past campaigns, a quarter of his money has come from developers, from builders, from property owners, and lobbyists, and other chamber leaders who are assisting his race.
Well, we touched on labor, and I'd like to talk a little more about that. As you guys both well know, thousands of people come out hard to get in and out of San Francisco every day. And we obviously had a tough time this year getting to a resolution of their contract. I'm wondering if you support a ban on strikes for BART workers, David Campos, and if not, how would you use your position in the Assembly to ensure that in 4 years the trains do keep running?
Let me say this, that I've spent a lot of time on transportation, but I completely disagree with this notion that the problem with our transit system is somehow the workers. What happened with the BART strike is an indication of the failed management and leadership of the BART Board of Directors. One of the things that I heard at the very beginning, before the strike actually happened from those workers, was that their main priority, their main concern was safety. And lo and behold, the BART management and board of directors did not listen to them, and we had a tragic death as a result. I think that we need leadership in Sacramento that tells this BART board of directors that is elected that they have to be accountable, that it's not enough for them to simply demonize workers, that the riders of BART need a reliable system. And I think that we need to make any funding of BART contingent upon management being transparent and being responsible. This is the same BART board of directors that, in my opinion, to this day has yet to make their police department transparent and accountable to the people that they serve.
I, like David, also believe that elected leaders need to do a better job of working with our friends, our brothers and sisters from labor. And I certainly think that the suggestion of taking away the right to strike would create all sorts of unanticipated consequences that we can't predict as of today. And that the model that we have seen in the last few years of being able to work with labor here in San Francisco to get things done is one that I would like to emulate. I was proud to be at the table a few years ago when some of us who are city officials got together to work with our workers, our representatives from labor, to hammer out San Francisco labor-backed pension reform. We now have a war on workers on the state issue of pension reform, and I was proud to be the first elected official in San Francisco to say that we can't demonize our workers when it comes to these issues, workers who have bled for years and have expectations in what they were promised years ago. And I'm proud in this race to have the support at this time, the early endorsement of over 10 labor unions, including our janitors, our commercial workers, our carpenters, and others.
It's interesting to see the guy who just raised $450,000 criticize you for your connections to corporations. It's really interesting to see that. There's an article in the Chronicle where the person from the Chamber of Commerce, the State Chamber of Commerce, talks about David Chiu, and this is what they say. They say this. The article says, the Chamber of Commerce traditionally supports Republicans, but it's looking to broaden its horizons. One of the assembly races that they want to jump in is the assembly race in 17th Assembly District, because they have heard good things about David Chiu. They sure have.
Business. Let's jump then into the conversation that's been ongoing around the country, really, about the state's minimum wage. Would you support an increase in the state minimum wage? And if so, by how much an hour? And would you rather see that pass through a ballot measure or in the legislature?
Well, you know, I think that it's always, you would hope that when you elect people to do their job, that they would do it, and that they would pass legislation that actually makes it so that we have the right minimum wage. I'm actually proud that, as far as I know, I'm the first member of the Board of Supervisors that is on record as saying that not only should we increase the minimum wage, which I'm glad that Mayor Lee and others agree we should, but that we actually need to be very clear about what that amount should be. And I think the amount should be $15 an hour, which would actually put San Francisco as the first city in the country to make that a reality. And I do think that the state of California needs to follow suit. You cannot deal with the affordability crisis that we face in San Francisco, this tale of two cities, unless you make it so that people who work full-time, who are struggling, can actually make enough money to live in San Francisco. You know, we gave Twitter a $22 million or $100 million tax break, depending on how you count it. Don't we don't we at least have a responsibility to make sure that working people can afford to live in San Francisco?
So a couple of things. First of all, I was the first member of the Board of Supervisors to support after the mayor mentioned he was considering raising the minimum wage to say we need to do this. I also agree with David Campos that we should bring the minimum wage to $15 per hour. The very first job I had between high school and college, I was a janitor in a local public school making $3 an hour. And we know that that is completely unlivable this day. Years later, I worked in the city as a civil rights attorney, and I represented sweatshop workers who were being paid $1 to $2 an hour, who were being abused for their wages. I worked with day laborers in the Mission who were also abused around their wages. Let me also say a couple of things. The suggestion around the so-called chamber line, and that gentleman I'd actually not met, but I want to say I do think people in San Francisco are sick and tired of these sorts of attacks back and forth in how we engage in our politics. And let me be clear, I'm in nobody's pocket. And I also want to say, of my donors who contribute to me, most of them are small donors, like everyone in this room, who represent every aspect of our assembly district. And I also want to say, I have taken on the chamber on many fights for working people. This past year, I passed first in the country legislation to give workers the right to ask their employers to take care of their family members, to take care of their loved ones, to take care of their sick ones. You read the newspapers, I took the chamber on that. I led the fight from the Board of Supervisors against the luxury condos, 88 Washington. David waited in the wings until a month out before he started talking about how important this was. And I have taken on the $60 billion plastic water bottle industry, the $16 billion yellow page industry that is supporting David Campos in this race right now.